President, I rise to talk about something different today, something equally urgent and concerning, and it has to do with legislation that's present here in the United States Senate and in the House of Representatives. It's about an issue called sex trafficking, human trafficking. It's a crime against humanity, a human rights issue that really transcends partisanship and transcends politics. And every day we aren't acting here to help push back against this. Countless vulnerable women and children are suffering. I personally think it's a stain on our national character that sex trafficking is increasing in this country, in this century, at this time. Experts tell us it's increasing because of the internet. So the internet, which has so many positive aspects, also has a dark side, and one is the selling of children and women online with ruthless efficiency. I appreciated the Senate Commerce Committee holding a hearing last week on bipartisan legislation called the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act, and I appreciated the opportunity to testify in support of the legislation at that hearing. But actually, the most powerful testimony by far came from a mom. Her name was Yvonne Ambrose. Yvonne got a call on Christmas Eve that every parent dreads. And as a dad of 3 kids, I can't imagine. Her 16-year-old daughter, Desiree, was murdered while being exploited and sold for sex on Backpage.com, the industry leader in online sex trafficking of minors. A 16-year-old girl should never have been trafficked online, but the tragedy of her death is compounded by the fact that Backpage.com, this website she was bought and sold on, has repeatedly evaded justice for its role in child sex trafficking. We know from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children that Backpage alone is responsible for most child trafficking. In fact, 75% of all child trafficking reports the organization receives from the public has to do with Backpage.com. We know from a nearly 2-year investigation by the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, which I chair, that Backpage actively and knowingly facilitated online sex trafficking, coached its users on how to post so-called clean ads for illegal transactions, and knowingly edited ads to conceal evidence of crimes, including to conceal evidence of underage girls being sold online. Despite these facts, which are horrendous, courts have consistently ruled that a federal law called the Communications Decency Act protects Backpage from its liability for its role in sex trafficking. This law is 21 years old. It shields websites from liability for crimes others commit through their site, and it was enacted when the internet was in its infancy. It was intended, by the way, in part to protect children from indecent material on the internet, and now it's protecting websites that sell women and children for sex. This was never Congress's intention when enacting the Communications Decency Act. In fact, California's Attorney General, Javier Becerra, testified on this point in the Senate hearing I talked about last week. He was a congressman in 1996 when the law was enacted. In discussing the Communications Decency Act, he said, and I quote, "I sure don't remember in 1996 ever believing my yes vote meant that I was going to allow 21 years later for kids to be sold through the internet for sex," end quote. Congress clearly did not intend for this broad immunity to occur, but courts have made it clear their hands are tied because of legal precedent and have invited Congress to fix this injustice. Just last month, a Sacramento judge made the most blatant call on Congress yet. The court threw out pimping charges against Backpage.com because of the liability protections provided to the website under federal law. The court opinion stated, and I quote, "If and until Congress sees fit to amend the immunity law, the broad reach of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act even applies to those alleged to support the exploitation of others by human trafficking." Because of this interpretation of the law, over the last 20 years, only Congress can fix this injustice. And again, that's why I introduced the bipartisan Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act. Along with co-authors, Senators Blumenthal, McCain, McCaskill, Cornyn, Heitkamp, we are determined to get this bill passed, to make a difference in the lives of countless women and children who have been exploited by online sex traffickers. And last week's hearing was a very positive step in that direction. We had bipartisan support at the hearing, and I hope that after that hearing we can move quickly to a markup. I want to thank Senator Thune, who was on the floor earlier, chairman of the committee, for his leadership in this area. The bill would do two things, and they're both very targeted and narrow. One, it would allow sex trafficking victims to get the justice they deserve against websites that knowingly facilitate crimes against them. Second, it would allow state and local law enforcement to prosecute websites that violate federal sex trafficking laws, again, with the knowing standard. This standard of knowing is a high bar to meet. Websites would have to be proven to knowingly facilitate, support, or assist online sex trafficking to be liable. Because the standard is so high, our bill protects good technology companies, good actors, targets rogue online traffickers like Backpage. Our bill preserves also the Good Samaritan provision in the Communications Decency Act, which protects good actors that proactively screen their websites for offensive material. These are common sense updates to bring a 21-year-old statute into the 21st century. And this bill has received wide bipartisan support. 33 senators have supported it, 1/3 of the entire U.S. Senate as co-sponsors. We also have the support of dozens of anti-human trafficking groups in all of our states, faith-based groups from around the country, law enforcement groups, all the national law enforcement groups, including the attorneys general, the groups out there that actually are involved in these prosecutions. They have all publicly endorsed this legislation. And some significant players in the tech and business community have also stepped up to support it. Recently, Oracle endorsed the legislation. Also, 21st Century Fox, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, Walt Disney Company, and others have supported our narrowly crafted legislation because they know it's necessary, it's needed, and it doesn't affect the good actors. I'd love to see others in the tech community step forward and help us. We want them to be partners with us in this. They should be as concerned as anyone, if not more, because online, on the internet, this is taking place. They should want to support addressing this injustice where traffickers exploit women and children with immunity. Some in the tech community have argued that this bill will inadvertently harm good-intentioned websites. I don't believe that's true. But more importantly, nor do legal scholars who have looked at this. Attorney General Javier Becerra explained in last week's hearing, quote, "We have to prove criminal intent. We can't win a prosecution unless we show that the individuals we're prosecuting, like Backpage, had the intent, the knowledge to do what they're doing. The legislation you have before you is very narrowly tailored. It only goes after sex trafficking," end quote. That was our intent, to do it narrowly. The bill targets websites that knowingly facilitate sex trafficking and protects those that don't. It's as simple as that. And I think those in the tech community who remain in opposition to this legislation have to realize that by doing so, they are protecting these bad actors, bringing a bad name to the internet. Instead, they should partner with us to protect our kids. I've spoken about courts and attorney generals calling on Congress to change the Communications Decency Act, but the most powerful call on Congress actually came at the Senate hearing last week, not from a lawyer, not from a judge. It came from a mom. Yvonne Ambrose, who I mentioned earlier, the mother of the late 16-year-old Desiree Robinson, with great courage stated, "Backpage.com and other companies like it must be held responsible for what they have created. I'm sure when this act was put in place in 1996, the internet was in its infancy, and it was not intended to allow companies to legally sell children on the internet. But somehow, a dollar has become more important than a human life. If you're going to fix this problem," she said, "fix it. Let's fix it." Last week's Senate hearing was a step in the right direction. Senators from both sides of the aisle understood the injustice that occurs and were passionate in expressing their desire to find a solution. I will just tell you that we have very carefully assessed this problem over the last couple of years. Carefully and thoughtfully, not just assessed it, but looked for a legislative fix that would be the solution to the problem that we've identified. We now need to act on it as soon as possible to save those women and children who are being trafficked online every day as we wait. The Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act stops an injustice, and I urge the Senate to take up this legislation, to seize this opportunity, to have the markup, to get it to the floor, to get it to the House where there's companion legislation, and to fix this problem to protect our kids. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.